Hey, Woody? Hey, man, you gotta see this.
Just as cruelty and wickedness have become a daily routine today. In the mid-2000s, there was a clandestine clinic that looked like a haunted house due to its terrifying appearance, where pregnancy interruptions were performed at the hands of Dr. Gosnell, or better known as the biggest annihilator of some countries. This man committed atrocities that shocked both the country and the entire world. The discovery of the Dr. Gosnell clinic came by chance when, in an investigation into prohibited substances, they entered the clinic and found a horror scenario that exceeds anything unimaginable. Faced with this situation, they were shocked by what they saw. In the waiting room, they found women sedated and encased in broken recliner chairs, surrounded by trash and debris. Lots of cats and rats were also seen throughout the compound. But what they discovered in the other rooms of the clinic was even worse.
Hell no! Come on!
Police found gruesome evidence, including fetuses severed from their parts and stored in water bottles, as well as contaminated medical instruments and in subhuman conditions. That didn't look like a clinic. The tension on the scene was palpable. The gruesome details they uncovered were shocking, and many of the officers had to take frequent breaks in order to carry on with the investigation. From the moment the police discovered that clandestine clinic, they began an exhaustive investigation of Dr. Gosnell and his practices. But what worried the police was that they did not have enough evidence to arrest the doctor. Since it was a pregnancy termination clinic, it was protected by various agencies, and without conclusive evidence no one would pay attention to the case. Despite the reality of so many atrocities found in that clinic, how unhealthy he was and those born in pieces were not enough evidence to prosecute this ruthless man.
I thought you were a lawyer.
In the midst of an exhaustive investigation, the police were able to determine that there were procedures where pregnancy interruptions were performed after the allowed gestation time, which was 24 weeks at that time. Even after birth, the doctors separated their members from him with his scissors. But this was not all. The police also determined through the investigation that a woman had died poisoned by prohibited substances supplied in one of these interruption procedures. That is when the case transitions from a narcotics and negligence investigation case to a death investigation. However, to continue, the police request the support of the department's prosecutor's attorney, so they can take the case to trial. This prosecutor, despite being pro-choice, is horrified by the evidence, and decides to catch Dr. Gosnell at any cost. The lawyer, accompanied by a police officer, presents the case before the judge, who is in charge of signing the reports. This judge prohibits her from mentioning anything related to newborns, or about the interruptions of pregnancies, since she does not want to be involved in cases that question the right of women to choose, and to avoid major problems. That is the only condition that puts to be able to sign the case report. It is incredible to see that in the face of the chilling practices that were carried out for more than 30 years in that clinic, the authorities of the time belittled the evidence of the events, turning a blind eye to avoid being singled out. Despite the conditions given by the judge, the police obtained the order to arrest Dr. Gosnell and some of his employees for the crimes committed.
Doctor, she don't look so good. She's a funny color.
With this arrest, a long legal battle began that lasted for years. At the beginning of the trial interrogations, the lawyer discovered that for 17 years, the health department inspector did not inspect the Dr. Gosnell clinic, because they had orders from the city governor not to inspect this type of facility. Clinics, as they did not want to impede the girl's right to choose. At the beginning of the trial there was no coverage by the press, since they did not give importance to a case against a doctor who interrupts pregnancies. But it is thanks to a blogger who was closely following the case, who published a photo on social networks, and the next day the entire press began to cover the trial and the statements of those involved who were not nurses as such, because they had only received a 20-minute training by Dr. Gosnell.
Did you ever see or hear a baby cry?
Yes.
The tension in the room was growing as time passed. The lawyers shouted indignantly, while the spectators were perplexed by the seriousness of the events narrated. One of the most impressive stories is how Dr. Gosnell left one of her patients in a room alone, after applying strong medications to induce the end of the life of the unborn baby. Minutes later, the patient, who was lying on the floor, began to expel a large amount of plasma. However, instead of receiving medical attention, the clinic staff did not provide any kind of help at the pleas of the woman, who in the end, managed to survive. But not everything stopped there. The woman felt extremely ill after the procedure, and she discovered that she had been infected with a sexually transmitted disease. This fact was crucial for the investigation, since it revealed the lack of medical care that the clinic should offer, as well as the suffering and danger that women faced when undergoing these delicate procedures.
Call doctor.
The defense lawyer, for his part, tried to make the room believe that the case was about harassment of pregnancy termination clinics, and made believe that it was a personal and religious issue. The defense also claimed that Gosnell was a dedicated and compassionate doctor who provided medical care to underserved communities. Because of that argument, the lawyer was having a hard time winning the case, but she gets help from the blogger girl, thus obtaining decisive evidence for the trial, where he showed a photo taken by one of the former employees of one of the newborns who was already lifeless, lying on a tray in the office, with a gestation time longer than allowed by law. At that moment, the entire jury on the bench was stunned by the evidence, and the room was filled with wailing and sad faces. The nurse who took the photo described how the moans and movements of the newborn were evident even after receiving a lethal injection. Another ex-employee recounted how Gosnell used to keep fetuses in bottles in the refrigerator for study. The accumulation of evidence and testimony made clear the cruel and ruthless nature of Gosnell's actions. It all came to a head when Gosnell took the witness stand and faced intense cross-examination from the prosecutor. He refused to answer direct questions about his practices and was evasive and defiant during his testimony. The hearing was held in abeyance as Gosnell defended his actions, and the atmosphere in the courtroom became increasingly tense as the statement continued. In addition, strong evidence such as falsified medical records and negligent inspections by authorities were presented. All of this contributed to Gosnell's conviction as a 3-time serial killer of live births. The Dr. Gosnell trial was one of the most shocking trials in history and shocked the entire world, as it was able to go unnoticed for many years. The inhumane practices and extreme negligence that took place at his clinic caused people to question the clinic's regulation and supervision of such practices. The revelation of the horrors occurring at Gosnell's clinic also sparked heated debates about the morality and ethics of pregnancy termination. Many argued that Gosnell's case was an example of why clinics should be regulated and supervised. In medical terms, the Gosnell case also caused the medical community to reflect on its own standards of practice and the importance of oversight and regulation of medical professionals. The impact of the Gosnell case was deep and far-reaching, ranging from the regulation of clinics of this type to the responsibility of the medical community in guaranteeing the safety of patients. The trial was intensified by the presence of journalists and pro-life groups who were closely following the case and spread it throughout the country. In addition, prosecutors presented evidence that Gosnell maintained an unsanitary and dangerous medical practice, including the presence of rats and cats in his clinic, as well as a lack of essential medical equipment and supplies. It was also discovered that Gosnell had a practice of falsifying medical reports and documents to cover up his criminal acts. All of this led to a unanimous verdict of guilty on 3 counts of murder in the first degree, as well as numerous additional charges. The Gosnell trial is a powerful story about human nature and the capacity of an individual to commit terrible and ruthless acts. Through the dramatization of the testimony and evidence presented at trial, one can appreciate the power of justice and the importance of continuing to fight against injustice and cruelty in all its forms. The room erupted with cheers and tears of relief, as justice finally prevailed for the victims of Dr. Gosnell. The Kermit Gosnell case is also one of the most shocking in the history of medicine and justice due to the number of lives that were affected for 30 years, and the irreparable damage it caused cannot be ignored. But we really learned something in this story, where it shows us the importance of listening to the victims and not ignoring warning signs that may indicate something out of the ordinary. Despite the fact that the crimes committed by Gosnell were terrible, it makes us question justice and how it can affect society when measures are not taken in time. That it is an alert to the importance of protecting the most vulnerable and ensuring that justice prevails in a timely manner at all times. Because otherwise, we will have an uncertain future and no one will guarantee that events of this magnitude will never happen again. This is the summary of a movie based on true events called Gosnell. Click here so you don't miss the next story.